Hey.
Welcome to part 2 of the Unsung Heroes of the Adventure Team. I'm Derryl.
And I'm Todd.
And today we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. This is a reprise of a presentation that we originally presented at JoeCon 2018, but since that time, the main designer that we've been talking to over the years who helped us out with the first 2 presentations, Bob Hudson, he continues to surprise us. He was a pack rat. He took a lot of stuff from the adventure team home. He has told us that his garage and his basement are packed with things. It's not all adventure team stuff, it's just stuff. And then every once in a while he uncovers like a trove of information. And just a couple weeks ago I met with Bob in Rhode Island, took him to lunch. He had some new art and we incorporated that art into the presentation. And then even yesterday he wrote us and had even more art. So the story continues to evolve. So yesterday we learned about Fred Evans, Bob Hudson, and Carl Cederholm. Now, a lot of the story that we know from the event that we're hearing from the adventure team actually has its roots in the 1960s G.I. Joe. John Micklich talks about it in his book that Hasbro was having issues, primarily public relation issues with their, the huge military presentation that the line had, and they started to concept items to get away from the military, to try and diversify, not get away from the military, but they also were afraid that military sales were going to come down from the incredible heights that G.I. Joe had when it launched, and the peak years were like 64, 65, but then they did notice some softening. So right around 66, 67, when Carl Cederholm, the team sculptor, started, that's when Hasbro started looking at a wide variety of concepts. And that includes these concepts that were in his archives. These are prototype outfits that were created by the Hasbro seamstresses. Many of these outfits we're going to show you actually have G.I. Joe tags in them, the shirts, the pants, the vests, which is what makes them extra cool. So not only were these made for presentation to the Hasbro executives, but the seamstresses actually finished them as if they were final products. It's just that extra touch that's really cool. I mean, they really paid attention to detail, and that detail was executed in the total design and even the prototype. So these prototypes, they have chaps. It's all in 1/6 scale. They're made with real materials. This is real cow leather. The next one is, this is one that originally, in our original presentation, I posited that it was a bomber jacket, because that's one thing that we never really had in the Joe line to complement the fighter pilot was a bomber pilot. And the bomber pilots, as we know them, were primarily World War II era, with the leather bomber jackets. So Todd and I have been talking about this, and Todd was thinking, really, this is probably a cowboy prototype to go with that set we talked about, because the jacket is shearling. We know bomber pilots were that more thick leather designed to really insulate. And I believe he's right. So we're now cataloging this as an additional cowboy prototype.
There's some additional detailing in the backside too. This scallop that looks very much like a Western jacket.
So they looked at a whole range of cowboy stuff. So these are all precursors to the adventure team. And the next one, this is really cool. A buckskin prototype. It could have been for Indian or Frontier Scouts, something like that. Really cool. The fringes are super cool. These were all found together, and again, many of them are tagged. So now we go to the adventure team. So we know the thinking was going early on. One of Bob Hudson's first jobs when he came to Hasbro, and you can just go to the next slide. So there's Bob. He's the bearded fella, third from the left. We met with Bob again in 2018. Todd and I took the team to dinner, and he brought along 2 new G.I. Joe designers. The one next to, I can't even believe that's me, but the one next to me, the second in from the left, is Dave Weindell. He still lives in Rhode Island. He is still like a concept designer. That's the one thing we found. Many or all of the G.I. Joe adventure team designers, they had pretty short-lived careers as far as design career, toy careers go. They're from 2 to 6 years on average. They all went, and the vast majority of them just became independent designers and sold designs to Hasbro. And there's a whole contingent of these designers who live in Rhode Island who just make their trade. Bob Hudson, until last year, was designing Nerf blasters. And every year he had a new Nerf blaster design that he would just put into the line, and that's how he made his career. It's just after he left Hasbro, he just sold ideas back to Hasbro. So anyway, so we met with Dave Wendell, and then, sorry Todd, if you could go back one slide. On the right, that's Joe Perez. Joe came to this reunion from Texas just to meet up with the guys, and then gave us his story. And then, so what we want to go, let's go to the next one, and we're going to talk about some things that Bob showed us that continue his legacy in design.
Yeah. So this is just an example page. This is a initial drawing for something that we all know, and it's a high voltage face mask, and you can just see how simple that was. But there's the detail on the strap and whatnot, and how that would.
And Bob, one of the things he told us, he says, I'm not an artist or draftsman or illustrator. I can't draw, with it. And he showed us this, and we're like, well, that's exactly what went into production. So your skills, we're reassuring him that 60 years later, your skills are good enough for people to interpret that. We didn't need to tell him anything, but he's very kind of down on his abilities, as a draftsman.
So this is one of the more recent pictures we got. So you notice something a little bit different about the mobile sport vehicle here. If you look close at the chair stand, and that is how he originally designed it. And it was just like that. It was a one-piece unit, and it was based on he based the chair on Means chair.
And so one more thing about this mobile support prototype. Anybody who has a mobile support knows that the maps. I think there are a couple of maps in the mobile support, maybe 2 to 3 maps.
2.
I forget. They were originally designed to be on separate, spines. But for cost reasons, they had to combine them together. But Bob told me in that prototype, you will find the maps have 2 different things. Unfortunately, the prototype doesn't exist anymore. Only the pictures that he took of this is like a proposed catalog shot that was never used.
You can also see that the AT logo is painted on there, whereas we got a decal. This is one of the cool things.
Wow.
So this is basically the crab walker. Is that what you? Okay. So
Crab crawler. I think.
Crab crawler. So this was meant to be an action pack. This got very, very close to production. This, through a really interesting mechanism, could kind of scoot back and forth and move sideways. And probably the best way I can describe this is briefly, about 25 years ago, car companies experimented with rear wheel steering. Okay, I drove a Honda Prelude for a while that I could park in any parallel parking space in one shot. Just boom, done. And that's the way it works. It just, you kind of skitter back and forth, and with just a little movement to one side or another, and you move sideways. So it wasn't actually rolling sideways. It would do that kind of skittering motion. Just is a really, really cool thing. And it folds up very much in the manner that the action packs that we had. And this is something that you can see, this is very close to production here.
And it was, this was actually presented for the Joe line in 1975. So this was past the heyday of the action packs as we know it. And only a few of them were carried forward into the late or the orange box adventure team line. But Bob was proposing this as an all new tooling investment to revitalize the line, and ultimately management. They even made, as Todd said, this got very far into concept. The engineering team took it and built this prototype that we think Bob still has, but he can't find it. He thinks that a furnace repair person might have stolen the Foot Locker it was in a number of years ago, so he can't locate it. But yeah, go ahead.
That's one of the concept drawings and how that could be utilized. There's a little kind of latch mechanism on the side there. And the idea was additional tools could be added. This is kind of like a sample scooper that he's got there. Or whatever else you might think that is, because there's something else up on the other side as well there, which is very, very cool. And then we've got this one where plugged into the power pack on the back of it is a scanning device of some kind. Or actually it's oxygen. We're going to his oxygen mask when he's got the scanning device.
some alien terrain.
Yep.
And so this design suite of ideas is typical of what was going on at Hasbro through the Adventure Team era. One hallmark that was consistent through the Adventure Team is tooling reuse. And Brad, you were mentioning that the other day, that you noticed that. And it is true, they reused almost everything. The helicopter came in different colors, the mobile support was reused, the ATV came out many times. Everything was reused and repurposed and presented to us in a different way as a means to save on tooling. And the way they presented this vehicle, so here's a design and here's other ways you can use it, was the way that they did things, just to show management that we have a smart idea on how to reuse the tooling and present this in different ways. And both designers that we're going to get to in a minute were brought into the company actually under those auspices. They were brought in to look at and repurpose existing vehicle concepts.
So to that end, another proposed action-packed vehicle, those little support pods look familiar. So this was actually a little floating boat. This would support the weight of Joe, and those were the pods that we saw on the swamp boat. And it folded up and went in the back. It also had a little elastic band-driven motor that would propel it. So that would have been very, very cool. So, fortunately, that picture is the only example that exists.
Is that the swamp boat?
Yes.
Or is it the ones that go on the view for the Seawolf?
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
That might be the.
Yeah, the floater for the viewer. For
It's the Seawolf viewer.
I think you're right. Seawolf viewer. Yep. Yep. Okay. Now, this is just awesome. Okay. So this was moving forward to develop a follow-up vehicle to the mobile support vehicle. We know what we got. Wasn't quite as ambitious, okay? But you see that this is the turbine on the top is actually a launcher for some kind of, I guess today we would consider a drone, but it could have been pretty much anything.
So
this
that-
is an aerial camera. We had an aerial camera on the mobile support vehicle.
So there was one kind of toy technology that was actually never incorporated into the Adventure Team line, and those are the spinning whirly discs. So you can wind them, they have like a spring-loaded motor, and they work like crazy, they fly. And
Mobile
Bob,
support vehicle.
what's that?
Mobile support.
Oh, the mobile sport vehicle used it.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yes, it did. You're right, you're right. I
So
stand
that,
corrected.
yeah, so that was just a little bit larger application of that. And again, you see things in here similar, a little similar to what you saw in the Big Trapper, but just much more simply. Now, in this case, the front end section actually would separate. Not sure how it defied gravity on the two wheels, but it's one of those mysteries we may never get solved. But this was a really, really cool unit. So there's elements here of a mobile sport vehicle, but also the troubleshooter. You see a little bit in the back. There's another side view. And the flying disc is the flying disc size.
This one actually has two axles at the back. The prior
Yeah.
concept only had one.
Just one. And so that's the disc launcher mechanism there. And then this in the back is really cool. He was looking to do something different. Again, the research that they were doing, he found out about phased radar systems, which basically had this grid with holes in them. And that appealed to Bob because Bob was the hole guy, okay? He loved that design. Part of the reason they did not go forward with that design underneath it was no one really knew what it was. No one could look at that and automatically said, oh, that's a radar dish, or that's a, but it was a kind of very forward-looking design.
And he wanted to use it. It was the technology that the Army was incorporating in the 70s for their new radar things. So he wanted to contemporize the Joe team with that.
So you also see the legs there on either side of that unit in the back. So that was meant to come out and stand on its own, just like that. So you would then have basically a pickup truck type vehicle that you would pull off with, or you would have an empty bay and you'd separate on your front two wheels and move forward from there.
So Bob was, as he told us these stories, he was very into a team of Joes going to like a remote place and then each having like separate functions, like one stays behind and one could return to base. And they thought about the play very heavily, and everything had a purpose in the play.
Remember, this will fall to the mobile support vehicle, which is really the first two-seater thing. So I have, going all the way back to the Jeep, so, yeah. Okay.
And so, Bob said his nickname at the company, or he often signed things as Huts, so I don't know where that came from, but so he provided this. They really didn't give us any more context in this, it was just another like mini vehicle that Joe could have. It doesn't have a ton of functionality, but it's, very designed forward. And Bob said, this is very atypical of his designs because it was very finished. Usually his things were much cruder, like we saw with the Outpost Defender, but he put a lot of time into this one. That's it. And so the two new designers that he introduced us to are Dave Weindell, who worked at Hasbro for 5 years. And Dave is really known for a few things. One of the things Dave did was he was the first one to get charged as a young designer with figure out how to flock the Joes, because they just heard that Palatoy was flocking things. So he went all over Rhode Island, flocked everything. We saw the Intruder yesterday, he got flocked. But what his triumph was, is the Adventure Team headquarters. Now, yesterday we also alluded to the fact that Hasbro executives often ask the G.I. Joe team, or told them that, hey, we've got this idle production line over here, we want you to do something with it, fill that production time so we don't have to let those people go or sell that equipment. And one of those machines they had is a heat sealing machine. And Hasbro first became a toy company, and we learned this in the Mickley book from Don Levine's creations of like sealed vinyl notebooks and doctor kits and stuff like that. It was all heat sealed vinyl. Well, that heat sealed vinyl machine hadn't been used in a while. The executives said, we've got to do something with this, what can you guys do? And that's where the Adventure Team headquarters came from, really a mandate to use this technology. And so they call it vinyl stay vinyl, is what the designers call the industry term is. And they created this. And it's really funny when Bob talks about the headquarters, he says, I would have done it totally differently than the way it was done. He said, I would have done it by using opaque vinyl and printing on the vinyl rather than fully illustrated things, surrounded by clear vinyl. He said it's really backwards. But as kids, we didn't notice that. I thought it was awesome. It's funny how he's critical.
And this prototype appears to be done more that way. The panels are printed on there. You can see that.
Yeah.
On the sides.
And if you go back, no, this one, right? So it shows the first prototype shelves they have were just these crude X shelves before they figured out the final shelves. And there's a lot of very crude, first working prototype, things, but the structure is all there.
And there's still a cardboard box under the map table, so.
Yeah, that never changed.
That never changed.
That never changed. And so the next it does show the final, the final shelf design. We're getting just a little more final.
Still a little bit less detail on the back panels than that would come
Yes.
later. Yeah.
Not that it doesn't have the Don Stivers illustrations on the back panel yet. And another concept that Dave Weindell worked on, that actually he was most proud of, is the Seawolf. So the Seawolf is pretty much a design masterpiece, and in that it works. And it's not a tricky thing to get all the weights and the balances and the buoyancy to actually work. But the problem is that this vehicle actually worked too well. So when they went to shoot the commercial for the Seawolf, they had the submarine going down in the water. Everything worked perfectly. They shot it, but when the legal team saw it and they showed it to the networks for broadcast, they said, well, you can't do who's watching that submarine down there, right? Because what they had is a camera below the water. They said, well, the kids are down there watching. I said, you can't show kids, going underwater.
Persistently staying underwater.
Consistently.
You know where to take the
So, in a moment of brilliant necessity, Dave created the camera that goes with the submarine. And he used those pontoons. This was created like almost overnight, and it solved their problem, but it was a late addition to the set. And it allowed, basically, it worked. It showed that the kid could see underwater, and that allowed them to use the commercial footage they had. So it was really, the legal restrictions. The legal mandate was that everything needed to show the method of activation. So that was the the truth that everybody had to go to the method of activation. There's what's when you look down, you see number 1, so.
So we've got some other, pre-production drawings of Seawolf and versions and directions they didn't go on, which is really interesting. I particularly like that one. That's very good.
Oh,
Cool,
nice.
Yeah.
Design.
I like that.
This next one is very, very Captain Nemo.
Yeah.
Okay. Very, fish-like in some ways.
So glad.
And, yeah, kind of glad it didn't look like that. But again, you've got that, see, there was a thing with having Joe prone. And this was, there's a number of reasons for this, but one of them was he did not sit well. Okay, so having him prone in vehicles just worked out very, very well. It was easy to get him in, easy to get him out.
You know, you mentioned the other one looked fish-like, this one looks squid-like.
Yep.
It's like these
Yeah.
weird
It does.
tentacles out front.
Yep, both very, very organic. And then we see there Joe, he's tucked right in the front there. Yeah.
And so this is Joe Perez. So Joe, unfortunately, we met with Joe, amazing, gregarious guy, but he unfortunately passed away a few years after we met with him. So after Todd and I went through the presentation again, we said, oh, we've got some follow-up questions we didn't ask just to clarify some things, but we can't talk to Joe, unfortunately, but he was very generous with his time. His time at Hasbro was pretty short. It was only a couple years. This was not atypical. A lot of guys came in. It was a time at Hasbro when there was a lot of transition happening. So you know, Hasbro was not just they weren't a big company then. Probably direction was changing all the time. They were trying to find their way. So a lot of designers came in. Maybe they were disillusioned or they didn't fit with the management team. They didn't stay very long. And so Joe was one of those. He came from General Motors, so his design training was in vehicles, and that's really what he wanted to do, but he hated General Motors. That's why he came to Hasbro. So, you know, he was brought in because Hasbro wanted to build platforms. So chassis and vehicles that could be innovated on and used over and over again. So that was a mandate. They actually hired people to come in and say, show us how we can design something that we can have multiple uses for. So maybe not dissimilar to what they do in the automotive industry, where a lot of things are reused for different vehicle platforms are built on, different vehicles are built on similar platforms. So he came in, and some of the things that Joe was challenged with doing were, one of the things was taking the ATV, which had been used in a couple of iterations already. The yellow ATV was used in, let's see, the tan one came out. Sorry, the name escapes me at the moment. But you know, they had used it a lot, and they needed a new presentation. So, so Joe really concepted, along with Bob, they worked very closely on this, the troubleshooter design prototype. Bob did the talking mechanism on the back and prototype that. So that's a prototype that he shows. And Joe did the rest of the styling with the front grille and then ultimately the treads. And then they proposed, this is a new photo that Bob just shared with us. There was they designed a troubleshooter team. And then instantly, Todd and I both wanted that orange helmet and that orange cap. Would have been so cool if those came with the troubleshooter, but they didn't. So this was just part of the presentation. But it's cool that
We,
those
however,
existed.
have spoken with someone who plans to make these available.
So Cotswold will have a solution for us. I'm sure the
That's right.
troubleshooter
Yeah.
team will be out soon. So, and there's the final design with the treads and Joe Perez's front grille. So some of the other things that Bob shared with us are, we talked about the pursuit craft yesterday, but ideally these pictures would have been with yesterday's, but there was a whole suite of awesome illustrations for the concepts that included the final pursuit craft.
More Hudson holes.
Hudson holes everywhere. And this was an initial design for ultimately it was the jet motors that we had, but they initially proposed propellers.
How cool would those turboprops have been?
Oh man, that's nice.
And notice the axles on the cab that stick straight out. Okay, in the first designs, the pursuit craft, the actual physical model the engineers built, used this design exactly, and they built those axles straight out. The problem was, once they actually got all the parts on, the weight was very backloaded, so it just kept tipping over. The simple solution was they just angled those out 30, I think 30 degrees was the solution, and then everything was perfectly balanced on that rolling platform.
You see it again there, with, they're swept forward and kind of even, and they'll get back. Also interesting, the front landing gear on that is kind of cool.
I love the color treatment on this, it's just so
Yeah.
cool and clean. We're getting closer to final, now they've they incorporated the jet motors. And they haven't figured out the pontoons yet.
And there we go, it's a little bit different than we saw, but still getting very, very close.
Yep.
Cool. I kind of like Joe looking at the engine and scratching his head like, is this really gonna get me up? A little dubious about that. So.
All right.
Okay, so we all know the escape car, and we love the escape car, particularly in view of what the escape car might have been. That's weird. That's just.
I don't even know how this would have been one of the action pack backpack vehicles, but somebody had an idea that it could be taken apart, folded up, and somehow strapped.
My theory is the wheels fit beside kind of each other, so you would stack two on top of each other, but it would still be, it was pretty ungainly carrying an escape car on your back anyways, in case you might need to have a ride, or game of golf breaks out or something, but, yeah.
But notably, it was piloted by an invisible G.I. Joe.
This is true too. Yep.
But
Okay.
totally clear G.I. Joe.
So, now this is the really cool stuff, okay? So, we're gonna, okay.
So, another designer that they brought in that we have not met with yet, but who is still apparently active, is a guy named Don Swedy. And Don Swedy did all of the, he was brought in, again, he was just fresh out of design school. This was the very first presentation that he did. And Bob provided some commentary on this. He said he's never seen a preliminary design sketch, like somebody's first effort, be this detailed. He says nobody does that. So Swedy was really trying to impress, people with this illustration. But they didn't know what the vehicle was and what it did. It kind of looked like the proportions and perspectives they're tough to get your eyes around. Because I think that's a missile, probably launches off some platform, it's going one direction, while the panels are going in another direction. It's a concept that, it's just something to show what they could do, but it was never taken seriously within Hasbro. But the next things that Swedy worked on, so he was brought in his challenge was take the mobile support vehicle and innovate on that platform, come up with a new treatment for us. And so there's a whole cool suite here. Ty, you want to navigate through these? And so these are all 75. So these are January of 1975 is when Swedy did the suite of designs. And then, I think we have. Certainly that one. I think we should. Okay. Yeah, it's number 8. Yeah. So a lot of things you see. He's playing with the front. He's playing with the back cargo. Things in the back had purpose. Some of them didn't seem to have a purpose. They were just designed for design's sake in the back.
So basically, from the center line down was the existing vehicle, and then they would move above and do some different cool stuff.
So these are beautiful illustrations showing Swady's talent.
This one is my favorite.
Nice.
That is just so freaking cool.
Nice.
And it bears some resemblance, but not a lot. There's a few elements there carried over, but.
So we'll see. Can you go back one slide? So I forgot to mention. So number 8 is actually a concept that Jim Egner has 3D printed. He has it over on his table, and talking to Jim, I think eventually he wants to finish out, one or more of these treatments. But you can see the front half of his work on this, and it's really cool. And so that resulted in the Big Trapper.
So again, big into pro-owned vehicles for Joe. It's a good fit. It's easy for kids to get them in and out. Okay, so they looked at going further with this concept with the camel. There's a number of different variations of this, one-man track vehicle. Just imagine how cool that would have been if they actually made something that looked like that. It would, you know, maybe something like this. So you may be able to buy something like this very soon. Different versions, different variations, but again, every time we see these things, some of these things look like larger vehicles, but you can see there's a Joe in there for scale.
And I love that orange one because it just had a shell on it that makes it like completely, you know,
Yep.
waterproof, so it could be amphibious as well.
Yep.
And so this is the one that Cotswold is actually going to turn into a real product, and we'll let Greg talk about that. You know, someday when he's ready, someday soon when he's ready to announce that it's fully ready. But this will be an actual product based on these concepts that we can get. It's got the removable.
One of the
tags.
longest toy development cycles in history, but. Just a really cool thing.
Yeah, and so they built in places for the radar and the, you know, the winch and the solar reflector and things like that. It'll be super fun. A lot of concepts around the same thing. Let's fit a Joe flat, let's make it probably very economical to package these, you know, real flat vehicles.
Just think also conducive to having an action pack in the back too, so. Treaded, very cool. Okay, now this. So when we first saw this picture, this wasn't the first one we saw. When we first saw one of these images, we had no idea what this thing was supposed to be. We didn't know whether this was like a jet thing and Joe was just in there holding on for dear life. Whether it was an underwater, you know, sea sled sort of thing. But as we worked our way through the different pictures, you could see water being displaced here. And moving further along, again, there's a cargo version. Okay. He's never got, there's a little alien there, but he's never got any underwater gear on, and this was actually meant to travel on the surface of the water. And that's what that would have looked like. So, also very, very cool.
Also coming from Cotswold Collectibles, this vehicle never had a name, but Greg has dubbed it the Turtle, which
Yep.
I think
Yep.
fits. So the Turtle will be coming. And so these are all Joe Perez designs. Again, the charter was designed a lot of concepts around like a new core or a new vehicle that we could use kind of over and over in the line.
And if you read Popular Mechanics or Popular Science in the 1970s, this is exactly the kind of stuff that you would see in there and that you never ever see anywhere else again. But it was a lot of kind of cool conceptual stuff.
I love this next one because it actually shows, it picks up, you know, one of the snakes, and it really shows how the adventure team would have, you know, interacted with wildlife. So the turtle against the giant anaconda.
Yeah. Okay. Not a viable design at all. I'm sure that was never really gonna go anywhere, so it's probably best that they abandoned that concept.
So these were likely done by Mike Cardabiano, who was another designer who came in. He was there for a short while, and his inspiration was drawn from the real military. So these were real concepts created for military vehicles at the time. They weren't used for the adventure team, but they were in the 1982 Real American Hero line that it launched.
That's the rapid deployment vehicle program.
Yep.
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 Yep. Yep.
Did some work there.
So presented for the adventure team, but never used. They went different directions.
So,
Okay, these are some brand new illustrations that Bob provided us. So these are kind of a little further out, done by somebody named Tavano, and Bob really didn't know much about Tavano. So Bob headed the preliminary concept design group that was largely in charge of the vehicles and bigger things, but other ideas did come from other groups. And this suite of designs we have illustrates that. This is more like what we could envision as an adventure team outfit. It's called the Harness escape suit. It's got a lot of things you attach over G.I. Joe. It's got some, bits and little tools you can use and things like that. So, this kind of makes sense.
Yeah, some cool details like, crampons that look, on the feet, and then you've got, familiar pliers and whatnot on the belt. So, kind of cool. This one's a little more out there, the armadillo suit. We're not sure whether this is what you would use pursuing armadillos, or whether you just were adopting armadillo mode. That's kind of funky. I argue that this one and this next one, the sound protection suit, were the result of someone watching a lot of Doctor Who. Because it's really was a lot, especially this one. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty campy stuff.
Yeah.
Now, around the same time, Palatoy was really going kind of crazy with the Action Man models. A lot of crazy stuff. Well, actually, we don't know what time these came from, but I assume these were kind of maybe later in the Adventure Team run, maybe 74, 75. And so it's possible some of the parts that are here could have been inspired by some of the Action Man designs for space and things like that, where they used a lot of the rubber pieces and things like that. We really don't know. We don't have much context on these.
Yeah. That guy just screamed Suntarn to me, but anyway, okay. So
Then, Bob revealed a couple of very interesting illustrations to us. This first one, to my knowledge, has not been used in anything, although I admit I do not have an encyclopedic understanding of all the license things or the books and records and things that came out, so we may have to enlist some help. So if anyone knows this came out, we'll ask Barry Kay, he knows a lot about these things too. But what was really interesting about this, first of all, the Joes aren't ready to encounter a tiger here. They're totally unprepared for this. But it's the illustrator on here that I think is the most interesting. It is a Ron Rudat design. So this was one of Ron Rudat's very first illustrations at Hasbro. He started, I believe, in '74, and this would have been done for the Adventure Team right at the beginning of his tenure here. And we asked Ron about it, and Ron has done so many illustrations over the years for so many different things. He doesn't remember any specifics of the creation of this. He doesn't know the context. But he did say that he was in the art department at the time. He was not a concept designer. So this wasn't an idea for a Joe set. I mean, there's not really much here that we haven't seen already. We've already seen a white tiger. We haven't seen a yellow and orange Bengal tiger. So it's possibly meant to illustrate that. But we really don't know much of the context of the set.
I think looking at this, and I've looked at this a lot because it's a really odd picture. I think his left leg is meant to be in a trap. See that silver thing there?
Oh yeah, look at
And
that.
these two Joes are actually attempting to rescue him. And I think that's what's going on there. But it's really hard to say.
You could be right. That was a theme that they wanted to go with, which is save the animals.
Yep.
So Ron Rudat. This is also a Ron Rudat illustration. Now, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. So what we have here is a pair of people in dress uniforms that look very much like Tomax and Zaymot. Throwing what doesn't look like a net, but it looks like a plastic sheet over a giant gelatinous blob with a huge eyeball. What the heck is this? We don't know. This came from the Adventure Team files that Bob Hudson took with him when he left Hasbro in 1977. So this was not something that was created for the Real American Hero. This was created for the Adventure Team, most likely, but Ron also served the other brands at Hasbro. But the fact that this was located with a whole bunch of
We're
Adventure Team.
open for any ideas.
So-
This is probably the oddest one.
What's that?
Like James Bond, it's kind of it's a station, someone's looking at, it's got a radar, it's like an eye.
Like an eye. Could be a radar station.
It's got like a camera, yeah.
So Ron has no recollection of creating this, what the context was for, but the fact it's nothing Adventure Team that we know, it almost is like a concept submission of some kind that he did. So
Johnny Quest and Space Ghost both had the one-eyed monster.
Yeah.
That was the electronic munch with one eye, and that screams that right there.
Screams out, yeah. So-
Is the chess logo readable at all on the original?
No, it
No.
actually looks like that was, it was kind of scribbled out. It appears it was either overlaid or scribbled out, or someone wrote notes on top of it, and now lost, but, yeah, it looks like there was a round thing there to begin with, but something's over the top of it.
Does that look like a steel mesh sheet they're trying to throw on it?
I don't think it looks meshy, I think it looks more like plasticky, but, again, it's, I guess you could put mesh over a slime monster and see what happens, but it's just.
Mesh
yeah.
over ooze? Well, what if it's electric? What if it's electric too?
Yeah, see, that could be too.
Definitely could be.
Hey, your guess is as good as anybody's.
And now it
We have
goes
no
closer
clue.
to Johnny
Yeah,
West.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's an electric field, and, they're grounded somehow, so.
Yeah.
Is this adventure team? I don't know. This is so different from everything we know. We don't know what it was though, and the fact it's Rudolph, it makes it cool, so. So here's a concept that Bob had for, one of the last things he did in 1977. It was for an extension of the Super Joe line, mini action robots, and they were thinking how to use the power and you know, and everything like that, and these little power pack jacks to do little things, fire missiles and stuff like that, so. And that's was really one of the last things that Bob did before he left to develop work, so. More ideas he had, so following the illustrations just for different power triggers and things like that. Oops. Now, this is a concept that Bob showed us, and initially, he brought this out at lunch just a couple weeks ago, and I said, holy cow, is this what I think it is? Is this like an unseen, he presented it as an unseen 12-inch headquarter concept, and it wasn't until I got home and I really looked at the details here. This is a 3 3/4 concept that Bob later created during his independent design phase and presented to the Joe team, the Real American Hero Joe team, as a concept for pretty much a Cobra Mountain playset. So,
Check the skull laying there on the side.
yeah.
And then when you, okay, so there's some design stuff.
It's this late prospector who knew too much. So somebody, so that little skeleton is like somebody who got too close to Cobra headquarters and didn't make,
Yep, and then we see inside.
So it's, the colorways are super cool. He thought of all kinds of play features like mini robots and everything in here. I mean, this is not an adventure team concept, but it shows the kind of thinking that
But if you
Bob
look at
had.
the chair, the chair rising up with the periscope and stuff, this is like the adventure team headquarters for Cobra. Equipment all the way around. Yeah.
Yeah, and so at first, when he presented this to me and he thought it was an adventure team concept, I was like, this is unbelievable, I can't even believe this exists, but it makes more sense as a 3 3/4 concept, given the large amount of material that would have been made for this, and the walls would have been blow molded plastic.
Yeah.
So, a very different material.
Over on the right appears to be a robot in the bay there. Kind of interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, robot blended into
Play
door.
features everywhere, you know, totally thought out there, tons of play features.
Yep.
And then, we just wanted to wrap up by showing, some of the other things that we found in the Cedar Home collection. You know, thanks to him saving so much of this, we've got, unassembled, Joe parts that are, kind of museum worthy, and in fact, you know, it's just a raw part before any rivets were put into it. Different things that give an idea to some of the early designs of Hasbro, like vinyl ponchos, the first version vinyl poncho. That SP top is really interesting because it has pipe, it has red stripes built into it, very different from the white ones that came later. And then felt marine dress pants. You know that the jackets came with felt cuffs, but they actually looked at doing felt at one time before. I imagine they abandoned that for cost reasons. There was a collection of standards, and these are really cool that they're stamped with a Chinese stamp that translates to product sample. I think, Todd, did you get that translated? Yeah. Todd got it translated. And so all of these have that stamp, and so it's meant to be a standard by which all other things would have been compared to. So nowadays that would have been a green tag or something that Hasbro uses to get the standard in, that everything's compared to that standard. There was a few cloth ammo belts, including one that we had never seen before, which is a cloth ammo belt that actually had snap pocket, snap packets. This would have been ridiculously expensive to manufacture. The cloth belts were ridiculous and quickly were phased out, and really didn't get any production beyond salesman samples. But the earliest one was even more ridiculous than that. So it just shows that Hasbro went through gradual iterations to get to the cost reductions they needed to, for the production of the line. Now, this one has kind of baffled us for a while, because the first example of this gray astronaut suit showed up in 1998 at a James C. Simone Pawtucket G.I. Joe convention. So it showed up in Pawtucket on a table. Somebody bought it. I wasn't able to get to it, but I looked at it, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And basically, it is an astronaut uniform, but it's made with a gray material that's impregnated with almost like little tiny aluminum flecks. So it could be a material that Hasbro can source on the open market, but I originally thought it was maybe a prototype for the 1965, space capsule astronaut as like an alternate way of doing a gray suit. But then I noticed the construction, that it is only one zipper. So it's not the 3 zipper that we saw originally. So what this is in fact an attempt to cost reduce the foil covered astronaut uniforms. It was an attempt to use and source a gray fabric in a way to kind of reuse that. Ultimately, I don't think they did, because it looks a little lackluster. It doesn't look as dynamic as the actual foil covered suits, and they eventually found their way out of the Joe line, probably due to costing, but not before the team tried to figure out how to keep that alive in the line, cost reduce it. There were some other interesting things in the Cedar Home collection that includes a variety of metal early concept rifles. Some of these could have been sourced from other toys that was added into the Joe line, which I think that existed. I don't think that's something that they tooled themselves, but they showed it in one of the early window box catalog, the 1966 catalog. Some early soldiers of the uniform, the Willie Bread we know is kind of legendary, but they did a lot of explorations with colors and fabrics on these. I mean, that could have been the tan one could have been just a US-like jacket that they wanted to use. So we've got a Willie Russian and then a prototype hat that's made with real fur. And a little cardboard star stuck there in the hat, and then just some other things. This is one of the most interesting ones. We've heard about the yellow skinned Japanese that actually did get out into the world. A good number of the yellow bodied Japanese exist. But what Carl had in his collection were 2 examples of an actual yellow skinned Japanese head. That never got produced. But this shows that Hasbro was looking at a fully color changed Asian figure. And what is interesting here is the heads are very different. One of them is marked 4566, an early, probably one of the first shots off the line painted. But the 2 heads, one is a hard plastic and one is a soft plastic. You can just squeeze it like like a gummy head. So 2 different plastics, same head, maybe ostensibly the same mold. And one of them has colored details where the nostrils are painted. It's really kind of wacky. And then here's some prototype Japanese things, including a pack with like a leather back on the top. Just interesting stuff, different green, and some early awesome parts. So lots of different early stuff here, which is contemporary to the time when Carl started at Hasbro. So he probably grabbed a lot of the stuff as they were discarding it. And some things with metal parts, which they would have used for the first tooling, and then carve that out of steel, and then actually tool it based on that. And so we see the craft grabs there, and the French thing, and the British thing. And there's some prototype jackets and things like that. Another thing that he had was, again from the 66 catalog, not this one, but the next one. In the 66 catalog was shown a suite of very crude cadet uniforms. So they're not as polished and finished as the final ones, two of the three were in the Cedar Home collection, the actual ones that were used in the catalog. It's, you know, the same placement of all the buttons and the finish, so that was really cool. Here's the early deep sea, polar exploration was a real fur jacket and a very cool, later one with a brown line with a deep rose. And, got some early breeches boy, I believe it's from the catalog. And then the next one is one that I dreamed about forever when I was a kid. I wanted that tanker jacket in a dark brown leather, and because it was shown in one of the Hasbro catalogs, kids could see this and see that, you know, that it never came like that. It was in the Cedar Home collection along with the prototype tanker helmet. So when I found this, the kid in me was like, I am absolutely fulfilled. And another one, some lineman spikes that I don't think we've seen before. I don't know if they exist in an Action Man line anywhere. I really wasn't able to find or confirm that, but they're pretty cool. And that jacket in the upper right is a true Kelly Green Beret. Unfortunately, there was a patch at one time on the sleeve that somebody had ripped off, so there's like kind of a hole in the sleeve. But that color is really cool, and it kind of shows that they were looking at a treatment of that for the Green Beret, that I think could be more true to a Vietnam, type of uniform. And then finally, this is another piece I got in Rhode Island, not in the Cedar Home collection, but it's the vulture that was used in the catalog, yellow beaks and yellow things. So just wanted to, these things exist. And that's really it. So hope you guys had fun. We've got a bunch of samples, and Greg, I don't know, we'll make sure that Greg shows this stuff at the booth, so you can see what's coming.